Hey guys, how y'all doing? You having a good day today? Did you feed your kids, if you have kids? Feed your dog, if you have a dog? Well, I hope you did. The place became a little bit messy ever since the robot assistant got stuck in the shop again, but I'm sure it'll be back to normal by the last part. That's usually how these things resolve. No, I'm not stalling. Why do you think I'm stalling? It's not that I didn't think of an actual intro and I'm just improvising this shit. Wait, where's the cutaway? There's supposed to be a cutaway. So, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Rockstar is one of the most controversial game companies in the history of video games. Yes, not every title of theirs attracted controversy. That was just hyperbole, Dad. Get off my case. But they did attract a lot of it. Too much, as a matter of fact. That's why the last few videos have been so fucking long. Similarly, not every controversy these fellas wound up in was going to receive its own part. They could have if I had extended the number of parts for this series from 10, but after going back and forth on what exactly I should do with them, I figured they'd be better off receiving the shotgun approach. After scraping up as much data as I could and doing a bit of organization and heart surgery, what we ended up with were 4 tales of lesser controversies involving lesser known, less popular Rockstar games. Plus 1 throwaway. And don't worry, I didn't leave anything important out of this. Trust me, I would never do that to my loyal viewers.
What about Thrill Kill?
I fixed that.
What about Depression Quest?
I refuse to fix that.
What about Anthem from the 2019's Controversies You Missed video?
What the hell are you talking about? That thing is a myth. Our first lesser-known entry from the lengthy Rockstar catalog takes us back to the very beginning. Or close to it. Coming off the heels of the massive success that was GTA 3, Rockstar had to maintain their momentum until Vice City would pretty much set them for life, and they did that quite gracefully with none other than Max Payne. Oh, sorry, that wasn't a Rockstar game yet. I meant State of Emergency. Released in early 2002, this little item wasn't fully developed by Rockstar themselves, despite them having a fair amount of hands in the dev pot. Now, the credited developers for this thing was VIS Entertainment, who coincidentally were made up of former members of DMA Design. However, looking at their catalog up until State of Emergency, that was probably the only interesting thing about them. I mean, you got some crappy license games, that Earthworm Jim 3 abomination, and whatever this is. State of Emergency is a beat-em-up where the US has become a dystopian police state thanks to those wonderful corporations forming a coalition called, the Corporation, and taking over the world and junk. You, yes, you, play as a member of the Resistance going around beating the shit out of anyone siding with those goddamn capitalists. Wow, what a preposterous setup. Nothing like this would ever happen. Disregarding recent events and, to be honest, the simplicity of the story, it still sounds like something that was destined to be enveloped in a swath of controversy. A game that involved mass hysteria, riots, and bloody anarchy, released not even half a year after one of the darkest days in American history? It's a salacious front-page headline in the making. And, well, yeah, that's kind of what happened. Except the controversy that the game did get attached to occurred around a few months prior to the big double bust boom during its initial reveal at E3 2001. It still did manage to get tied to another sensitive IRL incident, the 1999 World Trade Organization protests. This is a big pushback against ongoing global trade negotiations. It's kind of like the Occupy Wall Street of the late 90s, if we have to compare it to something. State reps from Washington, among whom was one Mary Lou Dickerson, one of the folk Jackman would try to get help from during his attempts to run Penny Arcade into the ground a while later, chided the game for making light of these protests and trivializing the cause behind them. Now before you go, oh boy, oh here come the liberal politicians ruining our good time again, this is actually the result of Rockstar shooting themselves in the foot thanks to an anonymous spokesperson who had mentioned these protests served as an inspiration for the game. What also didn't help was the original name for the big bad oppressive conglomerate, the American Trade Organization. Oh, and of course, the developers giving players the ability to maim and kill any of the endless array of bystanders without penalty, including those dastardly riot cops. Considering this and future events, Viz and Rockstar tweaked that stuff before release, resulting in the name change for the Big Bad to something even more generic, as well as a penalization for players that hurt anyone not sporting a red arrow or their big fat heads. Other than that, it remained the same riot simulator it set itself out to be, while also showing off some neat technical achievements for the time, as it could display a staggering number of NPCs on screen at once without setting the system ablaze. And though the critical response was still rather tepid, it still managed to sell a decent amount of copies on all the platforms it had been released on. And this is where Rockstar exits the picture in regards to State of Emergency, as VIS wouldn't be around much longer. After putting out some more underwhelming licensed games, suffering various financial struggles, and being bought out by fellow licensed game churner BAM Entertainment, a company also experiencing financial issues, they fell into bankruptcy, administration, in 2005. All of its staff were subsequently laid off, and all of their assets were subsequently sold to an assortment of entities over the next few years. One of those assets being State of Emergency 2. That would fall into the hands of DC Studios, another licensed guff-making company, and would be published by South Peak Interactive. As much as I'd like to end this on a happier note though, this game was even more reviled by critics than the first one was, and because it had sold more poorly too, DC Studios also imploded into bankruptcy a few months later. How ironic. Or maybe the series is just cursed. I mean, even the publishers aren't around anymore. Oh boy, another beat 'em up. This time from Rockstar themselves, but one based on a licensed property. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap here, isn't there? Don't get too confused, it's not that complicated. Released on the PS2 and Xbox in 2005, The Warriors comes to us from the good people at Rockstar Toronto, aka Rockstar Canada, aka Alternate Reality Technologies, aka Image Excel, aka Joe Mob. And during their heyday, they were responsible for the racing first-person shooter hybrid Quarantine, and its sequel, Quarantine 2 Road Warrior. Oh, I get it. They also had Techno Cop, but no one talks about Techno Cop. After Rockstar snapped them up, they crapped out those weird GTA London offshoots and the not-so-great PS2 version of Max Payne, so their output is a bit rougher than the other Rockstar subsidiaries, which I imagine is why they were given this project to begin with. Based on the classic film of the same name, it pretty much follows the same narrative and features the titular warriors going out into New York City, beating the shit out of anyone and siding with those goddamn rogues. This is definitely one of the stranger entries on Rockstar's catalog. In spite of that, it was better received than VIS's Anarchy Simulator, and it's been re-released digitally a few times on Sony's future consoles, so maybe they just wanted to get a one-up on them. But what was the controversy attached to this rather standard game? What, did it glorify gang culture and someone got mad at it? Did some naughty kids in the Bronx go out and rob all the markets on their street because they wanted to appease Cleon's hair? Did someone think Can You Dig It was a euphemism for Satan worship? Well, let's look it up. I bet it's a real doozy. Ow. It's another lawsuit. Can't go a single video without one of these, huh? This suit was, funnily enough, brought to you by the Can You Dig It guy from the film, or as he's better known, Roger Hill. And much how like Lindsay Lohan and the Mob Wife's chick would 10 years after, he claimed Rockstar had gone and used his likeness for the game without permission. Truthfully, this is a much different situation than those two suits because the portrayal here ain't no parody. It's clearly his likeness from the film that's being used, as is the case for most of the other cast members as well, so what gives? Well, according to Mr. Hill, Rockstar had approached the man earlier in the game's development so they could be granted that permission, but he had declined for them to do so. So I guess Rockstar just did it anyway. Oh, doesn't that sound familiar? According to the suit's details, Hill asked for $250,000 in damages and a court order barring Rockstar from using his likeness any further. After performing a cursory search on the legality for the use of one's likeness in a commercial product, it is certainly strange that Hill was the only one who sued when the other cast members from the film who didn't reprise their roles for the game didn't sue. Take-Two responded by saying they had a valid license to use that likeness and presumably any other character from the film. And then after that, something. Yeah, try as I may, I could not find even the tiniest hint of a follow-up to this. No word on whether it was settled, dropped, won, lost, swallowed by Satan, nothing. I considered reaching out to Rockstar themselves, because I'm sure they would listen to some scrappy YouTube jerk from Ohio, but I think we should just go with the most common possibilities. Settled privately or dropped without fanfare. Take your pick, probably the former, because the latter would usually result in a court document. Sadly, we can't question Mr. Hill either, because he passed away back in 2014. What a shame. At least they stopped rocks in the game.
Bring your best, you're gonna fucking need it.
Okay, now we're back to the more recognizable brand. Released for the Nintendo DS before being ported over to several other portable devices because it wasn't making any money, GTA Chinatown Wars was developed by Rockstar Leeds, following up their other portable GTA titles, Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories, with something slightly more original. Oh yeah, right, before being engulfed by Rockstar, they were called Mobius Entertainment, but they really didn't make anything notable before then, including that American Idol GBA game.
It might seem like a chorus, but it doesn't mean that I'm serious.
Yep, that was them. Chinatown Wars sees another gang-related story set in current year Liberty City, one focusing on the triads this time around, and one specific triad's quest to recover a family's sword, avenge the death of his father, I think, and deal with all kinds of wacky triad shenanigans. Ouch. That particular scene didn't cause any controversy, though. I mean, after playing these games for so long, I too would only be mildly concerned by someone ripping out a dude's heart. Trafficking drugs, though? Now that's too far, Rockstar. You have really done it this time. And yes, I'm being serious. A side activity in the game does involve drug trafficking. 6 types of drugs can be bought and sold to specific gangs across Liberty City to make one hell of a profit. There are a few variants here and there, and sometimes the police will try to bust your tri-ass. But that's the gist of it, and that's all it's really there for. One of several methods in the game to make some dough. Even then, it's not really that big of a surprise mechanic. I mean, something like this showing up in a GTA game was inevitable. Any of the previous ones could have had it, and no one would be the wiser. Okay, maybe it would have been contradictory to the themes in San Andreas, but Vice City? That would have made perfect sense. The game starts out with a drug deal, for God's sake. Regardless, the fact that one can indulge in virtual drug dealing, and on a Nintendo handheld too, was not gonna fly by the general public without some controversy. And by some, I mean one. And by one, I mean The Sun. No, I mean that shitty British tabloid. Yep, they published an article months before the game's release detailing outrage about this gameplay mechanic from the head of the anti-drug charity organization, Drugline. There is just something for everything here. Also, as expected, their statement didn't have a lot to offer beyond, "Drug trafficking is not a game and it is not a joke." Perhaps if this stuff were required to progress through the game, or was more involving, like, I don't know, having us actually make the drugs, there would be some merit to this singular outrage. But alas, there was not. Nothing else came out of it. Not even a decrepit Jack Thompson going, "Lord save me, Rockstar about to get their pussy whip." Doing some more research though, I did catch a few articles written about the game well after the fact, specifically a piece titled "The Dark Side of GTA Chinatown Wars," included in some high-class peer-reviewed university journal. It's an interesting read, but by the end it felt like this writer was just overcompensating for playing this game after warning his pupils about the dangers of drugs and whatnot. The psychological effect games like GTA Chinatown Wars have on our children is irreparable, and before we know, they will be sucked into a vortex of evil, which will eventually leave their minds incorrigibly corrupt. Okay, Kevin, if you say so. What was more peculiar was the date of this paper's publication, and I imagine you're thinking it was sometime around the game's original release, right? And you'd be horribly wrong. It was actually published just a little over a year ago. And for the one person going,
Well, Mr. Detective, how do you know this wasn't just a mere reprint of a decade-old article from a struggling research journal?
the writer references their self-quarantine in the very first sentence. Guess cabin fever was hitting them hard right out the gate. There are a few more positive articles centering on the game elsewhere, including this Vice column featuring an interview from a real-life drug dealer, and how their experiences compared to that of Chinatown Wars mechanics. Yeah, it kinda sounds like real-life X reviews commercial media products involving X, but it's still a neat read. So yeah, there weren't too many people fussing over this thing, which, frankly, didn't have much to be fussing over to begin with. Seriously though, just replace the drugs with like fruits or veggies or nuts, and it would just seem like an illegal farmer's market. I bet that's what they did for the Australian release, unless they just took it out entirely. Cause there's no way in hell they'd be okay with... Huh? It went through? No cuts. Alright then, so I guess fictional characters using drugs is a big no-no, but if they're just selling them, that's completely fine. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's good to know that the hardcore drug-selling game I'm making will get a pass down under. Last item on our list of miscellaneous Rockstar Games controversies isn't a game at all, but a BBC documentary from 2015 called The Gamechangers. This film chronicles the events of Rockstar's most controversial period, from the Devin Moore case to the hot coffee event, and stars Daniel Radcliffe as one of the Hauser brothers, as well as fucking Bill Paxton, rest in peace, as Jackie Boy Toppy Boy. Sounds like it'd be a fun time, right? Yeah, no, the intro text immediately dispelled any chances of that ever happening. And seeing this, it should be a surprise that Rockstar and Take-Two had filed a lawsuit of their own in regards to this for trademark infringement. I mean, it's safe to assume there is some legality needed in order to make this kind of film, but beyond the initial announcement of the suit, nothing else was heard from it, and the movie was unceremoniously released later in the year. And boy oh boy is it a movie. One that's impossible to watch legitimately, so I had to commit another act of scallywagging. Sorry to those who thought I was done with that stuff, but desperate times calls for a Google search. I won't go into too much detail, because I could easily go full nostalgia critic and spend a whole video combing over the innumerable problems with this thing, which for the longest time was the plan for this part, but let's just cut to the chase. This ain't good.
Come on, mate. You're Mr. Wolf.
Having gone through a majority of Rockstar's history over the past year and making videos on this specific period of time, there are a number of factual inaccuracies with the film's take on that era of Rockstar. Certain events are scrunched together or rearranged elsewhere in the timeline, and it all seems to have been done in a vain attempt to make these events more dramatic than they actually were. Perhaps the most egregious of these decisions would be turning Mr. Thompson into this troubled, misguided lawyer whose inane actions had the best of intentions and may have been truly righteous this whole time. In some sick, twisted universe, I suppose one could construe the real-life lawyer's actions as that. But because we're in real life, don't forget that it's impossible to put this prick in a sympathetic light and make it work.
Did you write to the CEO of Take-Two telling him that you're gonna take him for every penny that he has?
Yes, I did, and I don't regret it.
Did you say in the press that Sony dumping GTA on American kids was effectively Pearl Harbor too?
As for how they portray the Hauser brother, Sam Hauser by the way, well, it's like they looked at Jesse Eisenberg's performance as Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network and went, let's do that, but make him even more unlikable and remove any of the witty dialogue that made the character interesting.
Those table tennis screenshots are shit. The crowd perspective's all wrong, the colours are too muted. What has JP been doing for the last 2 weeks?
Well, he's been waiting for you to feed back on them.
Well, here's my feedback. He's fired.
Fam?
No, seriously, go to San Diego and fire him. That's twice now he sends screenshots. I won't put up in a kid's classroom. Does he realise how fucking untalented he is? Or does he wake up in the morning going, fuck, I'm not that talented, or is he oblivious to his own shitness?
Yeah, sure, I'll ask him that as I fire him.
What's even worse is that they clearly wanted to portray these events as even-handedly as they could, which was a mistake from the outset, But there are so many instances where it seems like they're siding with the violent video games are damaging the minds of our youth logic, and there's no scene more evident of that than their recreation of the Devin Moore murders, especially the sequence of events before then. I mean, they show him playing the games, and then they cut to the police officers arresting him for the carjacking, and then boomity, boomity, boom. It's all really confusing and feels like a SparkNotes version of the events at hand. Removing any foreknowledge of that stuff, though, it just ends up being a rather shallow and awkwardly written drama where things happen, conflicts happen, and they're all resolved quite flatly. And when I say awkward, I mean awkward.
Go get him, Jack. They're fucking with our kids. Fuck these people. Fuck them.
There are so many goofy lines in this script, and God, try as they may, the cast just cannot deliver them convincingly, as if anyone could. In addition to that, the visual effects are tacky as hell, especially when it comes to recreating the GTA gameplay. Even for a TV film, this shit wouldn't pass by early 2000s standards. So yeah, having watched it 3 fucking times now, I can confidently say I don't like this film. Now, I will come to its defense in regards to those criticizing it for providing a surface-level examination of the development for San Andreas, or the inner workings of Rockstar at that, because the focus is really on the controversies, and for as poor as a job they do in examining that, the development aspects and executive infighting is there for contextual purposes. I mean, if I had any other nice things I could say about it, I think the cinematography is decent, and the main performances are entertaining, only because they're trying so hard to make the bad dialogue work. But overall, this is an underwhelming, tepid, and rather embarrassing affair. A small part of me wishes Rockstar's complaint went through, but failing that, they resorted to ridiculing it on their official Twitter, and the few tweets from that are still up to this day. Those cheeky lads could probably make a better film themselves if they weren't sitting on their money throne, but who knows, maybe someone else will take a crack at this one day, and it'll be a bit better. Or worse. Probably worse. Just don't do it.
Hello? Certainly. One moment, please. It's Hillary Clinton. For you.
Okay, that about does it for these mini controversies, so let's recap. Riots, lawsuits, drugs, and cringe. Finge. None of them are nearly as interesting as a majority of Rockstar's other beats, good or bad, but you know, sometimes it's nice to take a breather, to look at the small stuff and just see how they fit in the grander scale of Rockstar's history, as well as, let's not waste any more time here. As for ratings, well, let's just go straight down the middle and give them each 5 hood rats out of 10. So, with the majority of Rockstar's guff tackled, cut open, and observed to the bone, where do we go from here? How do we end off this long-ass series? Well, I have an idea or two, but first I'm gonna open up this suspicious letter that was pushed under the office door just now. Probably my 3rd stimulus check. Yeah. I did forget that one. Oh well. Anyway, the last part for this series will involve... Oh, shit! Wait, robot assistant? I thought you were still in the shop.
I was, but my danger senses went off, so I escaped the facility to inform you that you're in danger.
Me? In danger of what?
Of dying.
You're gonna have to be more specific than that.
Your evil doppelganger is coming to kill you unless you do a video on the game mentioned in the letter you just got, which was sent as a warning, because as it turns out, he was planning this since the start of this series as an act of revenge for you ridiculing his wife, Martha.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna go get to work on the last part. See ya.
Sir, come back, I'm not finished.
Yes, you are, and so is this shit. Goodbye.